Welcome, everyone. First, we want to do some technical work.
We'll go over a few technical details first. The presentation will be mainly in Spanish, so if you're watching this on Facebook and you need interpretation, please go to the link that Kate is now putting into the chat for you. And once you're on Zoom, and also for everybody who's already on Zoom, if you need interpretation, please go to the bottom of your Zoom screen, click on interpretation on the icon and select the English option. Para decir, bueno, si alguien necesita interpretación al inglés, vayan al sitio de Zoom, presionen al botón abajo de la pantalla que dice interpretación y escojan la lengua que quieran escuchar. Como dije, la mayoría del evento será en español. So anybody who just showed up to Facebook, please go to the Zoom site, go down to the bottom of your screen and click on interpretation and English. Ok, parece que no hay ningún problema. Entonces comenzamos. Bueno, bienvenidos.
Welcome. Welcome to you all to this space. On behalf of Sexta Grietas del Norte and Chiapas Support Committee in Oakland, California, my name is Caitlin Manning, and I participate with various groups that got together to make this event happen. We also have on the screen Enrique Dávalos, who's a participant of the network Sexta Grietas del Norte, and is going to facilitate with me this event. Thank you, Caitlin. Good evening. As Caitlin says, my name is Enrique, and I will be here with you all. Sexta Grietas del Norte is a network of organizations and organizations committed for the anti-capitalist struggle from below. We accompany the Zapatistas in our territories and provide solidarity and support to the Zapatistas and to the National Indigenous Congress of Mexico. Sexta Grietas del Norte and Chiapas Support Community, each one has a webpage, a Facebook page, and you can also find us on Twitter and Instagram. The Chiapas Support Committee maintains a blog that's called Compañero Manuel Blog, where you can find translations of articles on the themes that we're about to cover today. For example, there are various translations of Luis Hernandez Navarro and various other journalists that talk about these themes. We convoke this reunion to celebrate the anniversary of the Zapatista Caracoles, and because we are alarmed, the attempted violence attacks happening in Chiapas these recent years that coincide with the COVID pandemic. This includes organized crime groups, terrorizing the inhabitants of San Cristobal, aggressions that continue with the goal of stealing recovered lands. There are groups that are very armed, and there is an infusion of cartels in the territory, also struggles for the control of the municipality where new armed groups are organizing. So before presenting the panelists, Enrique is going to give us a summary of the Caracoles, of the history of the Caracoles. Adelante, Enrique. Well, here we are. This that we're going to present to you is a very brief history of the Caracoles. I'm going to share a screen. Can you see my screen? Can you let me know? Yes, we see it. Okay, so in August, we celebrate the 19th anniversary of the foundation of the Caracoles and the Good Government Councils. These Caracoles were founded in 2003, which was a very important advance of the Zapatista autonomy. In reality, however, The Zapatista autonomy was birthed by the armed resistance of 1994, which allowed many communities, Maya communities, to recover thousands of hectares of land in the territory of Chiapas. So this land, which is the material base of autonomy, the autonomous municipalities were founded. Throughout many years, the Zapatista organization worked together or dialogued with the Mexican government to recognize the culture of the Mexican people. The negotiations, however, when the government betrayed those accords. In 2003, the Zapatistas decided that they were going to found their autonomy de facto anyway, whether the government wants that or not. In August 2003, 19 years ago, 5 caracoles were founded and 5 good government councils were founded in 5 zones of Chiapas: Oventic, Morelia, Roberta, Barrios, Morelia, La Garrucha, y La Realidad. In the 6th declaration of the Lacandon Jungle, a document of the Zapatistas from 2005, the significance of the Juntas de Buen Gobierno, the good government councils, are described. Among one of the important things that the good government councils were to realize was to coordinate the work of the dozens of municipalities, of the autonomous municipalities, trying to avoid inequalities among the communities. Another important activity of the good government councils was to coordinate the relations with the exterior world. For example, to avoid paternalism and favoritism of certain foundations and NGOs who come to Chiapas with good intentions to help, but many times they bring their own agenda. In third place, something that was very important was that the good government councils were going to advance and transfer the power of the Zapatista army, the military power, to the civil government of the Maya communities, the Maya Zapatista communities, which is very important.
Un poquito más despacio para la interpretación. Gracias.
Gracias. Como sede de las juntas de buen
As the seat of the good government councils, they form in the year 2003, the caracoles, the snails, the conches. These spaces have offices, auditoriums, galleries, schools, health clinics, sports fields, and many other things. In almost 30 years of autonomy, the Zapatista communities have constructed an entire life based on distinct values and even opposed values to those who rule in the majority of the capitalist world. With many difficulties and always under threat by the 1,000 heads of the capitalist hydra, the Zapatista communities reveal to us that another world is not only possible, but it is already being constructed. The good life, living the good life, community life, and systems that are very other, of work, of health, of education, of justice, of gender relations and family. Communities that are advancing with autonomy. That is to say, they're self-governed. They're looking to not depend, not even economically, not politically, not culturally, from the state. In the year 2019, it was announced that 7 more caracoles were formed, which makes a total of 12. As the compañera Caitlin said, and many other times in the past, today in the southeast of Mexico, in the state of Chiapas, today is lived a new episode of war and extermination projects. But they say, the Zapatistas say, that the seed of rebellion that they have sowed will not be eradicated. And they remind us that they have been doing it for more than 5 centuries, resisting exploitative relations and domination. 5 centuries. They are expert communities in resistance. Communities expert in resistance. The Zapatista movement opens up to the world rather than closing itself. It travels to rebellious lands in Europe, and asks, what about you? Are you going to allow the capitalist hydra to destroy Mother Earth, life, and humanity itself? We won't allow it. The Zapatistas are not alone. Long live the Caracoles. Thank you very much. Caitlin, we can't hear you because you're on mute. Thank you, Enrique. Thank you very much. And we're going to continue with the introduction of our panelists, our invited panelists. We have the great pleasure of presenting these 3 people who are going to help us understand the current situation in Chiapas. There will be 2 rounds of questions with everyone, and then we will take audience questions. So the audience can put your questions in the chat or in Facebook or here, and our compañera Kate will gather them and present them at the end when it's time for audience questions. We have the great pleasure of greeting Dora Roblero Garcia. She's director of Frayba, which is the Human Rights Center Bartolomé de las Casas, which was founded in 1989 with the Diocese of San Cristobal under the auspices of Samuel Ruiz Garcia, who practiced liberation theology. It's an interesting topic, but it's not a topic of tonight. Among other functions, Frayba organizes brigades of observers of human rights, and recently, for the first time, they have found it necessary to remove their observers to secure their security because of the attacks and because of the threats that they're receiving. Thank you. Diana Itzu is a participant of the resistance and rebellious network Ajmaq in Chiapas that was born with the electoral campaign of Mari Chuy, who is the spokesperson of the National Indigenous Congress or Indigenous Governing Council. The network Ajmaq has organized various caravans of observation to Zapatista autonomous communities, documenting the aggressions that they have received from military groups, above all in Caracol 10, in Conch 10, Zone 10. You can find out more about them on their website of the network Ajmaq, AJMAQ. Luis Hernandez Navarro, Enrique will introduce. Well, we also have the pleasure and the honor of having with us the compañero journalist Luis Hernandez Navarro. Probably here all of us know of Luis. He's a journalist and also a coordinator of the opinion section of the newspaper La Jornada in Mexico. He has a very long trajectory that we're not going to detail here in participating in movements and in covering social movements, in particular, the movement that he was part of, a student rebellious movement, and also working with the Zapatistas during those San Andres Accords years after the 1994 uprising. I just want to point out one of the many books that Luis has published. One is called, I didn't catch the name, Ser o Conducta. Ser en Conducta, to be in, to be conducted, to be in conduction. It's a real study of the political reality of Mexico in these times. Thank you so much, Luis, for being with us. Caitlin, I'll give you the word. Okay, so then we're going to begin those questions for you, Dora. I'm going to ask 2 questions and you can respond in the order that you want. There are 15 minutes, and at 2 minutes, I will put this up so that you know that time is about to be over. Okay, Dora, thank you so much for being with us. Can you talk about the types of violence that you have observed through Frayba? Who is promoting it, who is exercising it, and who are the ones that are suffering the most and being attacked? A second question, how do you see the connections to the different forms of violence, and how come they have increased at this moment? Very well, thank you. Hello, good afternoon, good evening from all your geographies. I am Dora Roblero from the Frayba Human Rights Center in San Cristobal de las Casas. From Frayba, where our response to these questions, thank you so much for the invite. The types of violence, unfortunately, from Chiapas, from Mexico, we have a long list of this violence, of human rights violations, which Frayba is documenting. Frayba is publishing in a systematic way all of these violences that are being lived. From Frayba, we think that we're living a crisis of human rights, and this is not just Chiapas, but throughout all of Mexico, and perhaps the entire world too. But I'm going to concentrate on focus on the state of Chiapas, which is where we are working from Frayba. And we identify many types of violence that are generated by diverse actors or circumstances. And one of the things that we see as a violence is the abandonment of the authorities in order to in one way, resolve or attend this type of violence that's being lived very closely from San Cristobal de las Casas, which is where they were living. And they were talking about from the beginning about this paramilitary presence, which is not new. The groups of the motonetos, which we're seeing in San Cristobal, and various groups of military groups that we're seeing throughout the communities. From Frayba, we see that there are various types of violence that is physical, psychological. It's a violence. It's also economic. We see an economic violence that is tremendous because the communities, there's so much dispossession that they've lived, which Frayba, we have been documenting, making denouncements And every opportunity that we have, Frayba is denouncing this type of war that is lived in the state of Chiapas because it's not named in another way. A situation of an environment of war is being lived, where violence on one part of paramilitary groups and another has as a consequence extrajudicial executions, forced displacement, torture, threats, death, intimidation, destruction of complete communities, the destruction of their lands. And the authorities are abandoning this because of a situation of threats and fear that's being lived in the communities. But it's not just in the indigenous communities, but also in other villages and cities, as in San Cristóbal de las Casas, Comitán, Tuxtla Gutiérrez, that now the security portion is not seen, but at any side, in any place. And that's where we speak about the abandonment on the part of the authorities, and Frayba makes responsible the government, the authorities that have the responsibility to resolve this type of conflict. Now that for a situation, interests we think that exists in the background of all of this abandonment and of this silence on the part of the authorities of not tending to this type of violence of human violations of human rights that we're seeing in Chiapas. From Frayba, we don't see any type of advance. We don't see any type of will on the part of the authorities to resolve, to want to resolve, and to want to detain this entire war that is being lived in Chiapas, where, as I mentioned, every type of violence is being lived. At least what's happened in the last 2 years, we see in a tremendous increase in violence of organized crime, which we see it not as a new problem, but just something that was just left, it was abandoned, and then it escalated. And that is the result that we're seeing now with the rise of various groups of organized crime, where there's all kinds of violence. There is trafficking of people, torture, taking away of liberties. We're also seeing the entire construction of guilties, culpables, guilty, the creation of this fake crimes that are placed on people, that people are falsely accused. They haven't committed any crime, but the government keeps them in prison. And from Frayba, we are tracking various cases from this situation, and we have very little response from the government. The government is not tending to this type of cases. They're just letting them stay in and be forgotten. And from there, that's where we were talking about the great abandonment of the authorities. Also spoke a bit, we've also spoken a bit about, well, you all spoke a bit about the Caracoles, and we from Frayba, we are documenting a lot of cases on dispossession, forced dispossession, that is seen throughout all of the regions, the highlands, the north, the border zone of Chiapas, where many families are abandoning their homes and are moving where they feel that they can be respected and have a dignified life, but fleeing their lands, their homes. And the root of that, Frayba has documented and denounced all of this type of violence against human rights. And And part of the responsibility of the authorities is tremendous, and it worries us very much. It worries us very much that all of this is happening. The theme of forced displacement, it has various violations to human rights, which I've mentioned. It's an extreme poverty. Communities are not able to plant, to harvest. Each time it's foreclosed. Their opportunity is foreclosed more and more to be able to find their food. And that's not even to say all of the access to health and to education. With all of this increased violence, that's not even on the table. Because what's happening right now, what people are prioritizing right now is their life, their security, their integrity. And we from Frayba, we are accompanying various cases that are on the table in the government, and that time passes and we don't see the will or the interest to want to resolve it. We talk about forced disappearances, which have also taken place at the root of this entire increase of paramilitaries. And we're seeing also the tortures, death threats, all of this criminalization of defenders of human rights, but also to defenders of the land and territory, which is becoming a really strong theme in Chiapas. There's all kinds of interests in these lands where the communities, or indigenous communities, they don't have the opportunity to defend it. Each time it's costing more to be able to resist. And people, well, keep on struggling because they want to defend their lives, their lands, the bit that they have left. And so who are the ones that suffer the most? The communities, the indigenous communities, the people who, for whatever reason, for questions of economic questions or education questions, they leave their lands. And if they were in extreme poverty, what's happening is that a tremendous crisis is being lived, lacking food and healthcare access. We see that there is so many people that are sick and are psychologically affected because of everything that's happening, and that there is no showing of attention on the part of the authorities. The communities and the peoples are have been knocking on the doors from Frayba. We have been making denunciations, putting out all this information wherever it needs to go. But the truth is that we have very, very small results, a very small response. And that's what it shows. And so what we're seeing now is a silence on the part of the authorities, where if we're going to have interlocutors, then okay, they'll receive us, but there is very little interest in even wanting to resolve it. So we are continuing making these interventions, looking to see how the communities can be heard. We see the roots of forced displacement that makes women and children vulnerable, and that the Mexican government has not fulfilled any of its obligations to respect the people's rights who are displaced and also that population that is terrorized. We see these armed groups, they go out and they can act with freedom, intimidating people, destroying property, destroying families, destroying life, and that they can just act with all that liberty, and that there isn't at the moment someone who can stop them. We see very clearly that those who are behind these types of situations, this type of violence that is being lived, we see that there are economic interests, political interests. If you remember, and each day that every time there's elections in Chiapas, the conflict and human rights violations increase because all of the interests congeal together. They make moves, and none of these interests benefit the communities, the indigenous communities, right? It's just about using them, and that continues to happen a lot. We're worried because this increase of groups, of armed groups, who are part of the organized delinquency, are growing. We always see more and more attacks, shootings. They're not hidden shootings. They're not a shooting out of fear. They are shootings that happen in broad daylight at any hour, whatever day. And we think that they have to do with the action of these groups, above all the Motonetos and San Cristobal. They're dedicated to charging, well, debts. The group, they become the group that's in charge of extorting people for money, to people, collectives, threatening them. We see these really serious violations of human rights. And also, there's also the presence of the National Guard, which on one side, it's the National Guard, and another is military groups that are occupying a great amount of land in Chiapas, but we don't see that they are acting against the organized crime groups. Instead, it seems as though they tolerate this type of situation and violations that are happening. Thank you, Dora. We've run out of time here. I don't know if you want to summarize in a couple of seconds. Yes. Just want to say that we continue working, and these spaces are helpful to be able to broaden the word and to let you know we're here and we keep working from San Cristobal. Thank you so much. It is very angering, enraging to hear all of this. And thank you for the work that you do. It's very important. Okay, Diana, so should we move on to you? If you might speak a little bit more, who's behind all of these violences? Who is it helpful for? On whose behalf does it work for? Even including the role of national capital and international capital. How has it converted into a political force, if you see it that way? That's a question. Sorry. And the second question is, how is violence affecting specifically the Zapatista territories and also generally resistance? What is the role of the EZLN? And if you might also talk about the militarization and the new cartels. It's a lot.
Bueno, gracias, compañera.
Thank you, compañera. Well, first, just to say a word of gratitude for the invitation, everyone all of the compas who are here, and to honor and to embrace and to give a lot of love to the Zapatista communities who are in their communities, in their geographies, who are sowing community. And because of that, it is possible to breathe that type of possibility of a radical democracy and a social justice and a freedom that's constructed from the communities. So all of this is just a lot of gratitude to the Zapatista pueblos, and also to what has been also this weaving of resistances and rebellions of the Sexta, International and National, and the National Indigenous Congress. On the first question, and who is behind all of this? Well, we come to consider, and we also try to interpret and understand, and above all, learn what the autonomous communities Zapatistas have been telling us from, now 28 years. First, let's remember that since the compas have talked to us about the Fourth World War, there's a very important text called Seven Pieces of the Jigsaw Puzzle. And I think that if we look at from 1997, we've already started to see the important role that organized crime has had, this globalization of crime and financialization. They're organized so that using the nation state systems, economic and political, then we see that the political parties, that the society of power, where these groups, these economic groups are, who also have a foot in the national politic, they are configuring these new forces, new crime forces. So the Zapatista Compas have been telling us since 1997, and also the Zapatistas have also talked to us about the restructuring of war, that we situate ourselves in and doing an exercise to see this genealogy of the modern nation state, to do a genealogy of war and all of this. They've been talking to us about this when they had the encounter on the capitalist Hydra. And also there was various elements of all of this that now, well, clearly we've been living as a world systemic storm in an era of collapse. And all of this signifies that capitalism is not coming to an end, but we're seeing a new, a patriarchal capitalism, that the only thing that they're doing is it's not a coincidence, because now the struggle of the six, of the EZLN and the CNI is for life. The struggle is for life. That this has been spoken as a struggle for life is precisely a way to generate those other worlds that are possible from organizing. It's to say, not resistance just about what we don't want, but also what we do want. And it's right there we can say, not just that another world is possible, but no, another world is already here. If it is possible, if we're capable and we have the courage to see what's already been sowed. The regions, the municipalities, and the zones in Zapatista territory, the community, social fabric of all of these native groups, Celtales, Tzotziles, Tojolabales, and Mam, they're all woven within the EZLN. Clearly, what we're seeing right now at the national and international level, which that they call the systemic the systemic storm, which Dora was talking about organized crime, contextualizing the current government of the fourth transformation and the context of Morena and the progressive government, which that we begin to retake what the National Indigenous Congress had told us at the time, that development and progress are declarations of war to indigenous communities. This about the progressive governments is a way to express this through their mega projects, through the militarization, through organized crime, through feminine violence against women, which are precisely territorializing these projects of death. What we are trying what we're trying to understand also in Chiapas is that with the new military bases of the National Guard, which are now 79, which add on to the 79 already, 24 more are being added, is where they're located in Chiapas. What we see in parallel with this war of sowing death is that the Zapatista communities are with a dignified stubbornness with new initiatives. We know that following in the face of the announcements of the new National Guard bases, the Zapatistas announced the creation of the 7 new Caracoles and 4 new autonomous municipalities, which, as we know, these are expressions of organization, of territory, of self-government, of food sustainability, all of these forms of self-management to say no war in the midst of war. What we are so moved by the communities, the Zapatista communities, is that they continue insisting on no war. They continue talking about taking and this is something that we're documenting in our network, Ajmaq, is that the case that the communities in Caracol number 10, where the community of Nuevo San Gregorio and the 6 communities of the region Moises y Gandhi are demonstrating with these acts of no war in the midst of war, how it is possible to sow dignity, how leading by obeying can continue to be strengthened. It's very important to mention that in the face of all of this integral war of exhaustion, it's not new, as Dora said, but there is a new modality that is not coincidental with why it is allying with these forms of organized crime. These war fronts, economic, at the level of politics, ecologic, military, paramilitary, media, how in parallel, the Zapatista families are from the levels, the scales of the personal, the family, the collective, the regional, the zone. They're also generating a response. A clear example is that this community of Nuevo San Gregorio that has 155 hectares. From November of 2019, they've been invaded by a group of 40 people. These 40 people, how did they begin operating? Well, first they invaded and then they destroyed. And when we say destroy, we mean they uprooted, they killed the orchards of the autonomous schools. They destroyed all of the harvest of wheat in the case of this community, which is a territoriality where there's a space where the regional work is of the Zapatista Compas, as a collective wheat project in this region. They have blocked water. They have blocked also the access where they have their fish, where they have their livestock. They have harassed. They've made sexual assault threats to women and to threaten women and children. And in the face of this, the Zapatista Compas from Nuevo San Gregorio Well, they are besieged in half an acre. From 155 hectares, they're at a hectare. And even within that half a hectare, they continue to reconstruct their autonomous clinic, their collective work, their carpentry collective, their ceramic cooperative. They build their autonomous clinic in that space. That is the one part. What we see is collective work and the strength of these Zapatista families to not fall into provocations, to continue being dignified and to continue celebrating life through collective work. But we also see the instances of self-government, in this case of the Junta de Buen Gobierno, the Good Government Council of Caracol 10, has been trying to, since February of 2020, to dialogue, because that is the challenge of the Good Government Councils. We're going to dialogue. We're going to, from below, we don't need the bad government. And the Good Government Council proposes to these 40 invaders to dialogue with the Zapatista families. And they make 3 proposals to these invaders. One of the proposals is that that the land be worked in collective work together with these 40 invaders who had already committed so many crimes, who had already destroyed, who had already invaded. It was proposed to them, let's work together in collective. They say no. They say, well, 2 hectares per person. So we're talking about 80 hectares that they were going to give to the invaders. And the invaders say no. And a third option that the good government proposes is, okay, well, why don't we divide in half the 155 hectares? And they still say no. And so then they continue to increase their acts of violence, and we see the harassment of the Zapatista families. This is another one of those examples of this type of group of invaders. They don't care about land. They don't care about collective work. And they don't care about working the land, and much less collectively working the land. These are groups that are part of organized crime. And the latest that we know is that the brigades, the observation brigades, had to be canceled. The human rights observers from Frayba, they were canceled in the face of sexual assault threats, with even national and international observers. This is in one region, in Moises y Gande. We see that the paramilitary group of Orcao, we see that they use weapons from the military. And they have already kidnapped a youth of 17 years. He was Zapatista. This was in November of 2020. Then in 2021, they kidnapped 2 defenders from Frayba. And then in September 2021, they kidnapped 2 compas from the Good Government Council. And then they start to burn down the autonomous schools, the clinics, the collective work, the theft of the cooperative stores of the Zapatistas. And so we see that it's not a coincidence that this is happening in this place, in this place called Chiapas, precisely because that is where the super highway that connects the Maya train with San Cristobal de las Casas and will then connect to the Trans-Isthmus corridor of Oaxaca y Veracruz, which is a mega project of death of the current government. So in parallel, we also see that another one of the offenses is one of their government programs, Sembrando Vida, sowing life. It's just another tactic of this government to call things, to use names to manipulate people. So sowing life, that program, it wants to re-territorialize a territory called Ocosingo, and it's not a coincidence there also that the Zapatista communities are, or at least in the official municipality, there are 4 other Caracoles, Zapatista Caracoles. One of these is number 10, and we have to say it. Caracol 10 is This is a generational Caracoles. This is the third or fourth generation of Zapatistas. They are youth. And we are also seeing a participation that is really important of women from the Good Government Council. So it's also not a coincidence that they're also beating the compas from the Good Government Council. So we from the network, Ajmaq, we are trying to tell the Zapatista compas that they're not alone, but also in a way that's organized. We also need to organize ourselves. We also need to, and we are organizing our network Ajmaq of resistance and rebellion. We're also trying to generate those acts of resistance and rebellion in our own geographies, in our own spaces. And, like with Dora said, San Cristobal de las Casas is turning into a nest of dispute of the cartel Sinaloa and Nueva Generación. And so all of this that we are trying to do is to put into practice that our struggle is for life. There is something that we are learning in these contexts of war, and it is that all of us, let's say at the level of the sixth, and who are here for a certain political conviction, for a certain political conscience, for another way, for another social relation, another world is possible, is that we have this mix that is so tremendous and marvelous of pain and also of love. And we see tenderness in the Zapatista struggle. So this mix of pain and love is something that that's called dignity. While one has dignity, it's going to be very difficult for a question of power, of money, of whatever necessity is that we would sell that dignity. So what we're seeing is that the Zapatista autonomous communities, we are confronting a context of war and death, and we're also seeing in parallel that blooming, that harvesting, that sowing that's being made and at the everyday level with children. Because now we're seeing a generation of youth that wouldn't have been able to see, it wouldn't have been possible to see this new generation if that armed uprising hadn't taken place in a very legitimate way. Their grandparents, those youth today that are now not eating toxic food processed, they're harvesting their own food, they have dignified education and health and collective forms of organizing. And you'd also see their mothers in dignified bodies with food that you don't see in other communities. We work also in communities that are not Zapatistas, and we see the poverty there. We see those pains, that dispossession, and well, that is what gives us that vital energy, that material, that sensibility, that material sensibility to continue struggling, to continue denouncing, but also to continue organizing ourselves and to live with hope. And well, that compas, I think that I've passed my time. Thank you, Diana. We could continue talking about this. There's so much to say. Enrique. Thank you, Diana, to talk about the call for no war in the midst of war, and also this mixture of pain and love. They're very important concepts. Thank you very much. So now we have the participation of our third invited panelist, Luis. Luis, we wanted to give you just a series of questions so that you can explain to us from your perspective how things are going. If you could allow us to put the situation in Chiapas in the context of capitalism, national and international, particularly from the United States, since, we're here from Sexta Grietas del Norte. and how do they relate to the cartels, the national, the locals, and the mega projects? This is just a small, tiny question.
También quisiéramos abusar de tu
We would also like to
palabras, si nos pudieras platicar un poco de cómo ves
also take advantage of your words, so you could, if you might tell us about this new phase of violence.
considerarse como un
Could it be
capítulo
considered as another chapter in the struggle, the ancestral struggle for land in Chiapas,
nos han
which the two compañeras have talked to us about,
importantes?
that are
Último,
very important?
ahora que estamos en el
And
19 de los Caracoles,
finally, now that we're in the 19th anniversary of the Caracoles, and 4 years have passed now of the government of the fourth transformation,
de los megaproyectos en el sureste mexicano,
and there's a great advance in the mega projects in southeast Mexico, what is the relation between the projects of the government of Andrés Manuel López Obrador and the Zapatista territories? Well, good evening. Thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you for Sexagretas del Norte in Chiapas. I want to just say that I am talking about a personal perspective. I'm not speaking on behalf of anyone. And what I'd like, it might appear that what I'm going to talk about is part of a series of Netflix. Each time is even worse, actually, than anything Netflix can come up with. We might begin by talking about someone, sui generis, who in 2003 went through Zapatista territory, and his name is Laredo Juan. And he's someone who comes from a lot of money, lived in Morelos, and then went to live nostalgically to a small municipality in the north of the state, in Pueblo Nuevo, Sonistahuacan. It's a municipality that doesn't have more than 30,000 inhabitants, half of them at least indigenous and half of them in extreme poverty. So there's a correlation with indigenous communities and extreme situations. So this man started to create a bunch of prosperous businesses, a luxury automobile distributor in the north of the state. You start seeing Audis and Jeeps, et cetera, which would be sold and would be bought. He started to take the ranches that were all around, paying as if it was an episode of Bonanza, without caring about the price of the ranches, just paying whatever they asked. And also to support the local political campaigns of the mayors surrounding him. And instead of and asking in exchange that he would get to name the chief of police and the other heads in different regions. So this person who began to befriend all of these politicians and senators and deputies, one of his children for his birthday party, one of the most important singers came to perform, and that was in 2018. And that was, sorry, and suddenly in 2018, he was arrested suddenly because of something that happened with Interpol that was going on with the US. So this is Chiapas. This entire network that he had constructed, he distributed white powder up to Chicago, New York, et cetera, et cetera. The mayor of Pueblo Nuevo, when he arrived, this mayor was also, it seems like he came out of a soap opera, like a horror soap opera. His name was Diaz Perez. He was originally from the band Los Cacheros, and then they called themselves the Diablos, and then became then became something related to a paramilitary. I'm sorry, I didn't catch what he said. He was responsible in enforced displacement throughout the region and appropriating lands and territories throughout the region, and was named an assessor of the mayor of the municipality, which started to appear in the media because a self-defense force, the machetes, appeared there. So he was one of the assessors of Trujillo Morales, who had been in charge of dozens of assassinations in the region, including the catechist, Simon Pedro, someone really important in the civil society. And these figures, imagine transplanting them, each one to different regions of Chiapas in the regional level, and then to start to go up scales that municipal fabric to the state and then federal level. It is, in other words, a web, a spider web that has been created and is tying up the power block in Chiapas. What we're talking about is that the world of the narco trafficking has existed in Chiapas for a long time. But in 2006, from 2006 to 2012, it expanded at an accelerated rate. It was precipitated in part because in Guatemala, there's one of the principal bodegas of drug trafficking. That's where cocaine arrives, which then goes through Mexico to then go to the US. Migrants, pirating, stolen goods, stolen weapons. There are all of these routes that have been modified throughout this time, but now there's a new corridor that goes from the borderlands, Comitán, Tonalapa, San Cristóbal de las Casas. This criminal industry is protagonized by old and new cartels. In Chiapas, we have the first full indigenous cartel now in Mexico from San Juan Chamula. They appear ever so often in national press, with scandals of human trafficking where many migrants tragically die. Up to now, the majority of the small number of indigenous communities that had participated in the sowing of drugs, we had that in the past, but we didn't have an indigenous cartel in the past. Now what we're seeing is the struggle of cartels for territories, for routes, where we see the cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación, New Generation, has advanced quite quickly, where in the last year, there was assassinations without consequences. We see a boom of narco trafficking in a way it's impressive. And we see how the old dominant bloc that had been put under a crisis at the roots of the Zapatista uprising in 1994. It was the dominant bloc that was about the plantations, the mountains, the material base for its own reproduction. This uprising broke. The dominant bloc today has reconstructed itself from the world, from the point of view of the cartels, of narco trafficking, of religious denominations, of paramilitaries, and narco trafficking. So right now we have a phenomenon that is clearly characterized as a paramilitarized narco. And it is a phenomenon that is not just participated, not just in what we're talking about, in dispossession of lands and reappropriation of lands and forced displacements of populations. Rather, it participates very clearly in a strategy of counterinsurgency, of closing the Zapatista expansion corridors to strangle the experiments in self-organization, of autonomous self-organization, to assassinate, to terrorize, just like the compañera just explained a couple moment ago. But all of this is taking place in a context that is very relevant. In the story of the different Mexican elites, the elites that have looked to transcend have always had a territory that was very clear to operate. The first group of revolutionaries were from Sonora, and those figures were the president. They had the state of Sonora. That was their terrain of operations. Then we have the panistas, like what they've done with the maquila industry, and has created the maquila region at Taiwan, Guanajuato. And they're there. They're just there, seated, just winning elections in Guanajuato, Aguascalientes. And how the previous president, Peña Nieto, he was very much in his seat was Mexico State. With the fourth generation, with the fourth transformation with López Obrador, his territory is southeastern Mexico. It allows him to have a territory for his politics. If you can observe where the great infrastructure projects are located of this administration, they are concentrated precisely in the southeast of Mexico. More in not just in Chiapas, but yes, throughout the southeast. We have the project, the poorly named Maya train, the Trans-Isthmic corridor, the refineries. What he wants to do, or what they're trying to do, is to do all of this development with all of these corporations. I mean, these are all real estate projects that create the conditions for these great development touristic projects. And not just tourist projects, also new commercial routes to continue the maquiladora style. So that's what the López Obrador does, is to create a seat, and to take a seat of this Tabasco group has created a very narrow alliance with this new family from Chiapas, the one reformulated from the one that I was talking about. All of these actors mix together. The current governor of Chiapas is married with the sister of who was the governor of Tabasco and is now the secretary of the government in the presidency. They are children of a figure who is fundamental in the construction of the project of Obrador, the projects of Obrador. This is the context. This offensive is an offensive of great, of great investments in business. This alliance is allowed to exercise violence the way that it does, and I insist in this context that the Zapatista resistance and the expressions of autonomous construction, that's what they are resisting. This is effectively a recuperation of an old struggle against the plantation. Now it's reformulated into the struggle against this offensive, this narco-paramilitary offensive. Thank you, Luis. These are very important concepts.
Todo este asunto del Grupo Tabasco,
Everything that you've illustrated for us from Tabasco to the maquiladoras in Guanajuato, these sweatshops.
de hacernos ver de manera
It
material
helps us see in a material way what is the intentionality of the fourth transformation, in which we see a context of why this violence is being permitted.
no pueden pasar sin
These projects cannot continue, of course, without crushing the social fabric of the communities. Thank you. Caitlin,
tienes tu micrófono apagado.
you're on mute.
Gracias otra vez, Luis. Sí,
Thank you.
interesante este análisis del
Again, Luis, this was a very important analysis of of obradorismo and its geographic relation with Chiapas.
Bueno, entonces vamos a la segunda ronda.
Okay, so we're going to go to the second round,
Solo tienen 5 minutos.
and you just have 5 minutes.
Preguntas para cada
We're
uno.
going to put the questions for everybody.
A responder. Yo no sé si Dora
And
salió.
I don't know if Dora left.
Bueno.
Sí, estoy aquí.
Ah, bueno, ok.
Yes, I am here. Oh, it's good. Okay, good, because I can't see you.
Dora, la pregunta era, ¿cuál es la posición
Okay,
de
so the
Frayba
question was, what is the
sobre
position of
la
Frayba
violencia?
and how and violence on the question of violence? And Diana, how do you see the sixth as a network at this moment against counterinsurgency? Do you have an idea over how we might think about organizing ourselves, not just in solidarity with the Zapatistas, but also as part of the sixth, but as an extension of the Zapatista movement? And for Luis, in the face of the diverse and complete and complex forms of violence that you confront, how do you see the forms of resistance and rebelliousness in Chiapas and throughout Mexico?
Esa última pregunta. Entonces, bueno.
And Diana can add to that second question as well.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much.
Nosotros desde el Frayba creemos
Well,
que,
those of us from Frayba, we believe that first,
haciendo nuestro trabajo,
we're going to continue doing our work,
violaciones a derechos
documenting and the human rights violations and denouncing them. We're going to go knock on doors at the 3 levels of the government that have the responsibility of attending and solving these types of conflicts. And one of our bets from Frayba is to have, from one part, from what Diana was saying, is the struggle for life. And we say as constructing peace. Our position from this time that we're living in is that we want to make several events, but also projects with the original peoples, with folks on how to construct peace amidst all the war that we're living. We believe that there's a lot of symbols that give us a lot of hope, as Diana was explaining to us. And that is what motivates us here in Frayba to continue with the struggle and doing our job. Obviously, in the part of solidarity, we also see it like a fundamental element in this struggle and this resistance. We believe that to articulate is also a very important thing we need to be doing through our networks, through our collectives, through our organizations, with people that are sensible to our situation that's going on here, or is interested in supporting or being here, and strengthen these struggles of resistance. The struggles that we're building are, I believe that here in Frayba we do have hope, and that the people are moving forward. They are demonstrating more support. The people are more organized every day. Each time they're speaking more with each other. So we believe that from that path, we can continue organizing and listening and forming organizations in conjunction is important as we speak more about this violence and denounce it, the more voices together that can make the three levels of government see all the destruction that's happening in the world. We believe that putting ourselves in a position that is in solidarity with the struggle of constructing alternatives is our challenge of creating these alternatives for life. The way that our compañeros invite us, as the Zapatistas invite us to keep walking and struggling together. And from the Frayba, we also believe that the path continues. And now more than ever, this defense of human rights is necessary. That's it.
Muchas gracias, Dora.
Thank you very much, Dora.
Diana, no sé si tú escuchaste las preguntas, parece que te saliste un poquito.
Diana, did you listen to the questions? Maybe you were out for a little bit.
Creo que ya la volvimos a perder a Diana.
Maybe we lost Diana again.
¿Qué tal si
Seguimos con Luis y cuando regresa Diana.
Okay, we can continue with Luis, and then when Diana comes back, we can listen to her. Well, what I was trying to explain a moment ago, the way that Chiapas is trying to reconstruct a rational a form of domination, where the practices of the old government that came into crisis because of the Zapatistas are forming themselves with new actors, with the alliance with Obradorismo. The way that Enrique was explaining it, it tells us about the complicity and the continuation of this counterinsurgency. When we talk about violence, we see it as something that can create three things: the dispossession, second, domination, three, and the control of the economy, illicit or illicit. And the way that we have this structural violence, what we look at, I believe that this process, it doesn't create itself cleanly or without resistance. I believe that there is an enormous power for resistance in Chiapas. If you look at it from above, it's like a great cauldron that's about to boil over, where the heat, the social tension, there's a lot of bubbles that are about to burst, but we can clearly see that it's boiling. There's a vertebral column that's in that resistance. That's Zapatismo, which is promoting autonomy, and there's other organizations on the periphery, and also many important actors like the magisterial people of Chiapas putting together some educational reform with the Mecote, which is kind of the same, but even though it's renewed, we have the conjunction of organizations that are NGOs that are defending human rights, like Frayba, that do a lot of important work, networks of solidarity that also play an important role, environmental groups. In other words, there's a very important intermeshing and network of resistance to these actions of the narcos, of the paramilitary of the government, to try to put out in one way or another these social programs that are counterinsurgency programs. And that's where we are. I think we're about to see really big events happen in Chiapas. We've seen it already. We've seen it in Tila, for example, in the regions of the jungle. So where is this going to go? It's kind of my crystal ball is turned into something opaque, so it's not very informed. But it's going to be this nasty growth of violence. It's going to become more important to find mechanisms to be able to get out of these mechanisms that aren't in this enmeshed with this violence as a component. So also like the way that the federal government wants to impose their projects and how these practices of uh, growing their businesses, expanding territories, like we've seen in this case, the Zapatista territories.
Muchas gracias, Luis.
Thank you very much, Luis.
Diana, ¿estás de regreso?
Diana, are you back?
Sí,
¿Escuchaste esas preguntas?
mande. Adelante, Kaylin.
Oh, no,
Did-
te preguntaba, Diana, si habías
Oh, I
escuchado
was
las
asking Diana if she'd heard the questions
de la segunda ronda.
from the second round.
No, ya no los alcancé a escuchar.
Okay.
No, I wasn't able to listen to them.
¿Cómo puede situarse
Okay,
la
so
sexta como red en ese contexto actual de aumento de
how can the sixth be a
tienes que
organization in context of the counterinsurgency? How can we think about organize ourselves not only in solidarity as part of the sixth, but also as part of an extension of Zapatista politics?
Sobre
And the question we asked Luis, and if you want to answer, is how do you evaluate the forms of resistance and rebellious?
Oh, se congeló.
And it looks like she froze.
Se congeló. No sé si me oyes, Diana. Estás congelada en una posición muy pensativa.
Diana, can you hear me? It looks like you're frozen in a very pensive position.
Bueno, hasta que se descongele, vamos
Okay, until she unfreezes, we can continue
invitarles,
and invite
vamos a pasar a la audiencia si hay preguntas.
the audience to see if there's any questions,
Oportunidad a los invitados de unos pensamientos,
and our panelists can respond to some of these questions.
Dice, aquí estoy, dice Diana, pero dice que el anfitrión no me deja.
Oh, Diana says she's here, but it looks like the host is not letting me answer.
Si Canek, puedes ver si hay problema con
Connect,
si
is there an issue with
parece que se salió,
letting Diana in, or
reentrar.
see if we can let her back in?
Mientras tanto, Kate,
In the meantime,
si hay algunas preguntas,
Kate, are there any questions that you can put up?
Bueno, mientras esperemos.
In the meantime, while we wait,
Un pensamiento como, bueno, aquí vienen las preguntas.
I did have a thought, but here's some questions.
Pregunta para Luis Hernández de la parte de
The
Víctor Manuel.
question for Luis Hernandez from Luis Escobar. I'm the magistrate from section 7. Well, if water is where the Zapatista, where the fish farm of the Zapatista are in the water. So if part of counter arresting this militia puts fish that are carnivorous to them in the same means, are there other actors in the movement, in the social movement of this water, as part of the context that is in our new a fish farm? What role does this play in the democratic magistracy? If you can tell us a little bit about this role. So Luis said, in Chiapas from 1977, the coalition of the magistracy from the interior worked on creating a more democratization, and there's been a lot of things that have happened since then. But today, the magistracy from Section 7 in Chiapas, they are the engine that keeps pulling the composition of the magisterial movement to bring into question the reform of 14. The elements of this educational reform, and I could tell you that the sharpest thorns that are in this in such a way in Section 7, they are always there. They're continually struggling. And I believe that the mobilization of this national movement that halted because of the pandemic and among other things, but is also on and making things happen on a material level for other means of saying it in the Section 7. So, and I believe that they can help in reanimate social movements, Zapatistas, the way that it happened in 2015, 2016. There, we could see that they played a very important role in occupying land and addressing some of the discontent that the social that society, civil society has voiced, and I think that is a role that they can play.
Kaylin, tu micrófono está apagado.
Your mic's off, Caitlin.
Uno de estos días me voy a acordar. Dice Robin Lloyd.
Okay, so what Robin Lloyd, so Obrador is a disappointment to the Zapatistas?
Es decepcionante.
Es una decepción para los zapatistas. ¿Quiénes son?
So Obrador is a deception to the Zapatistas. Who are your allies on the national level? I guess the question is for everyone.
¿Alguien quiere responder?
Someone,
¿Querías decir algo?
Dora, if you want to say it. I think the allies of the Zapatista compas are all the people that are organized on the national level. And also what we were saying about López Obrador, that we confirmed and strengthened lots of projects that were already being headed, and that he has strengthened them and developed them more. That in combination with everything that has to do with the multinational corporations, the mining, and they're coming in without any resistance to the state and to the country. Obviously, this hits very hard to the economies and the people that are resistant in Zapatista territories. And our point of view, yeah, we do believe that this is affecting the Zapatista people very negatively through what they're doing through all these multinational corporations, with all the projects of destruction that they are putting forth in Zapatista territory.
Hay una pregunta de Rosa, ¿puedo leerla?
Sí.
Aquí
There's
dice,
a question from Rosa, if I can read.
Pregunta que hace la compañera que dice, parece que hay
So Rosa asks, it looks like there's a coincidence with the increase of migration from people from Central American countries with the violence that's occurring in Chiapas. Do you think there's a relationship in this business of transporting migrants? Is this attracting more organized crime? This is an open question for all three of you. Although fortunately, it looks like Diana has been unable to connect with us again. Luis or Dora, if you permit me, Luis, I believe that this idea that the criminal industry is disintegrated. It doesn't the same networks through which migrants and drugs travel through are the same networks where the pirating happens as well. So the networks of complicity that need to be built to have the support of police and military and the authorities in general, so that one of these types of merchandise can pass through. This pretty much what lets all the other types of industry pass through. These infrastructures are necessary to be built. When we were talking about if the government controls every day more parts of these economies, so the migrants is only one part more. It's not an exclusive business. And we've seen that the scale of this has been going up. What is the origin of it? Of this? So what is the origin of this violence? Is it it's basically the dispute between corrupt businessmen between different cartels. It's like we mentioned, the Guatemala is a great storehouse of a lot of the cocaine that comes from Colombia and passes through Mexico. And now there's a whole cohort of actors that are unregulated, like the route to the north that used to be controlled by the Zetas, and the Pacific part was previously controlled by the Pacific cartel. And now there's a dispute with the cartel of Chamula, and these cartels cooperate with banks that wash money, with authorities that are in charge of Coyutlan, the businessmen that need to clean up those routes of money. But there's a great dispute that is increasing in a market that becomes more attractive, becomes increasingly more deregulated, in the same way that it's happened in other moments. That's basically how I see it. Thank you, Luis. Dora, I agree very much with what Luis has shared. From what we can see from Chiapas, we see that migration is a huge business. When we talk about the market, we see that it's a great arm of business that we see. And from various generations, we see that people keep migrating. So what we know, for example, is that each person is charged 2,500 pesos to go north. So imagine the number of migrants that pass every day and all the money that gets accumulated throughout all these people that move through all the smugglers, the polleros, or the people that are involved in organized crime. And this kind of violence that we saw that all of these people that are involved in this market are disputing this huge business. So they're disputing the land, the territory that we see is the struggle between the cartels in Chiapas. That's precisely what it is. There's a ton of money being moved from one part from the migrants, and of course through other people that are involved in armed trade, for example. But we do see that the migration component is a significant economic part of this here on this side.
Muchas gracias. Kaylin,
Thank you,
micrófono.
Caitlin.
Ujú. A ver, hay
Let's see.
mensaje, solo escuché, pero muchas gracias por
There's
los recursos.
a message here. I only listen, but thank you very much for the resources and the time of all these participants. I thank you for the struggle of everyone. I'll see you in the next virtual event. So I was thinking about this fabrication of creating those that are culpable, that are, but also the criminalization of resistance. Like the example is this, the priest Pedro Marcelo. At one moment, he comes out denouncing what's happening and criticizing the machetes. And all of a sudden, on the next day, that they send him a apprehension order for his arrest, and this creates a great confusion. Like, for me, it just seemed extremely improbable that Marcelo would have participated in all of that. I guess that's the confusion that is created with these type of accusations. Yes. So those of us from Frayba, we are supporting Father Marcelo and also working with several priests from the Diocese of San Cristobal. What we see is a tactic directed directly at the Archdiocese of San Cristobal, because they're the only people that have gone out in public to criticize everything that's happening with organized crime. And our analysis is that from the root of the Archdiocese starting to take this position against all the violence that is happening, then that caused them to be a target, to be attacked. There's many priests that are being attacked, that are being threatened in their own parish. They're receiving death threats, and in many ways they when they demonstrate their concern about this violence, then they start to receive these death threats. So the big example is this father, where that they start to put out the apprehension order against the priest because he is denouncing the violence. So from Frayba, we see that these accusations are false, and at this moment the apprehension order is on pause, but we don't know exactly what it is. The only thing they've said is that they might not execute it at the moment, but the order is still out there. And like the way this Father Marcelo has made this denouncement with recordings, with videos of the victims directly, making them public, has made him a target of the government. And there are also other interests that are interested in threatening him, to silence him. So since this apprehension order makes a lot of the members of the archdiocese to be in fear. So we are also worried about what is happening with the threats against the archdiocese. Interesting that the role of the archdiocese starts to regain its importance.
Sí, claro.
Do you have a question or a reflection, Enrique?
Logró entrar.
Va a
I
intentar
don't know if
entrar
Diana
porque
was able to come in.
su
So it
internet.
looks like she's gonna come in through the phone. She might be having internet problems.
Ya entró.
Okay,
Ah,
she's
ok.
in.
No la veo,
She's
pero
here. I don't see her, but Diana, can you speak? I see that your microphone is muted.
Diana, ¿nos oyes? Si nos
Diana,
oyes.
can you hear us? If you hear us, your microphone is mute. Okay,
Sí, yo les escucho.
yes, I can hear you.
Oh, ya te vemos.
Oh, we can see you. Oh, good.
Qué bueno.
Bueno, uy, qué horror esto del internet.
How horrible is internet.
Una disculpa, compañeros, compañeros.
Apologies, compas.
Sí, Diana, ¿nos puedes escuchar bien?
Diana, can you hear us okay?
Entonces, quizás, si pudieras platicarnos,
Maybe if you can talk to us, we've been reflecting on, like with Luis and with Dora, on how would you evaluate the forms of resistance that the communities, in particular in Chiapas, but also perhaps at a more general level, how do you evaluate the forms of resistance that the communities are following? You already talked about a lot of elements. You explained to us a lot, this issue that has to do with life, to saying no to war in the midst of war, and about interweaving dignity. How do you think that these strategies are working?
Híjoles, bueno,
Well, it's a bit complicated. One can try to understand why they continue, why these autonomous forms continue of the Zapatista autonomous communities, because I think one of our principal challenges as people, as collectives, as networks, as those of us who adhere to the Zapatista political project, we ally because we believe that we want and we believe that we deserve another world that's possible, but also because we have the heart to want to work to keep walking with more people. We see something, well, obviously the communal fabric is very important. When we say, what are we seeing in the Zapatista organizational practices? In the Maya communities, it's interpreted as chulel, which is your conscience. It has to do with an articulation with a multiplicity of scales. In other words, I'm a person, but I'm a person within a family, within a complexity, within those networks that they're made up by more families and more communities. But above all, I think it's the relationship that exists between Mother Earth. For many of us who are in urban contexts, we need to learn and unlearn those relationships we have with Mother Earth. And the organizational form that we're trying it's not like a recipe, but it's like instruments or tools that the Zapatista peoples are giving us. It's just the collective work. It's not just that, because it's also self-reflection. And that is to say that the compas themselves in a permanent way are always questioning themselves, evaluating themselves from in certain ways, seeing from within, how are we doing? How are we doing? How are we going? So we can keep going, and errors are recognized, but the most important thing is that they fix their mistakes, their errors. And not only that, they dare to continue walking many initiatives, this creativity, the not having fear, to coming into adventure that many interpret as something that's, well, it's a craziness that is like the tour of for life that took place in the context of a pandemic. So we're continue to try to understand this Zapatismo within these decades in a way that's permanent. In a permanent way, it keeps giving us initiatives and proposals where creativity flows. And I think that one of the most important elements is to knowing how to recognize your mistakes and fix them. And they also have this autocritique, self-critique. In critiquing, but in critiquing from the perspective of love. And it's not about romanticizing. When we talk about why the organized communities continue, why do they continue having this way of living together, coexisting with Mother Earth? It is very anchored in this that we say, well, these metaphors, this poetry. Why aren't we capable of, well, the Zapatista communities are walking them. They're not just talking about metaphors. They're not talking in metaphor. They're not just giving us the image. They themselves are doing it. And many of the challenges that we have in the urban context is one, well, what capacity do we have to organize ourselves? Maybe we won't be able to generate urban communalism, but yes, collectivity. We generate those collectives, those networks. It's not a coincidence that many of us from the six are trying out these networks of resistance and rebellion. What we still need to see is what capacity do we have to generate self-government, to generate food autonomy, which is one of the most principal projects of Zapatismo, and education, autonomous education and health, autonomous health. What capacities do we have in the cities to self-govern? We talk about the challenge in the valley of Jovel because it's one of the first. Jacinto Canek is one of the first caracol that is in the city. It's in an urban context.
Pero sí tenemos la esperanza de empezar.
Something she cut off and says something about the Good Government Council, and that we do have the hope to see these possibilities of organization of the self-government in the urban context. Now the challenges are also in food autonomy, in nutrition autonomy, and there also see all the challenges of the collective work of this, which in its moment was the 13 seeds. How do we generate dignified housing, dignified work, all in the urban? Health, education, communication, everything dignified. These 13 demands that in their moment existed. Oh, lástima. She's getting cut off.
Diana, creo que te estamos perdiendo.
Diana, it looks like we're losing you.
Creo, no sé, creo que lo hemos perdido. Pues quizás sea, pues después de estas palabras de la
Well, maybe
compañera
after these words from the compañera Diana, that maybe we can close off
este conversatorio,
this conversation or discussion, this dialogue that we've had.
parece que
Well, it looks like,
cumple con su papel, pues hace que obviamente los pueblos digan, no les
well,
tenemos
anyone that
de autosustento.
that
Entonces,
oh, it's cut off.
ver, ahí me escuchan.
Can you hear me?
te estamos perdiendo
No,
mucho.
we're
¿Ahí me
losing you a
escuchan
lot.
más? No, pues ya.
Estamos perdiendo mucho de lo que estás diciendo.
We're losing a lot of what you're saying, Diana.
Ahí ya, no. No, pues entonces la conexión, ahí ya.
Oh, it's the connection. Oh, I don't know if you're hearing me now, so.
Sí, no podemos escucharte.
No, we can't hear you.
Bueno,
Well,
entonces, pues quizás podemos cerrar.
so then maybe can we wrap up? There's been a very impressive quantity of themes and concepts that we've heard here that will have us reflect a lot. We think it's very important the way that the compañera Frayba talks to us about the climate of violence and all the forms that this violence is having, how Luis places it in context as how Chiapas is a very salacious environment for organized crime. And these forms of criminality, like these groups we talked about. And also Diana talked about the importance of all of these voices together organizing at the same time. And so we're seeing there that about the resistance that's happening here. We recognize and value very much the very clear position you all take in Frayba, putting your life on the line for yourselves and for the communities. You're going head on with this commitment. Thank you very much. And it's also been very important what the compañera Diana has talked to us about, how perhaps at the moment, like reading some foundational texts of the Zapatistas, like the 7 jigsaw pieces, learning about how the Zapatista communities are not just maintaining themselves in resistance, they are capable of building at the same time, and they are confronting it and saying no, and they're also saying yes. And the compañera Diana has also given us this reflection about the concept of progressive government, of progress. This concept of process is very tied up to development and economic growth, but it's very much tied into death. And this idea of saying no to war in the midst of war, and this concept of chulel as a conscience. And in the end, she helps us see at the end how the Zapatista world is also a sharing. It's really a work of art in itself, where on top of all the art, the poetry that it has produced, Luis has also given us many elements to understand the discussion and the context that's going on in Chiapas. He gave us a panorama that was very clear about how the regional system of power has reorganized itself and converted itself as part of a project that is a strategic to transcend on behalf of the fourth transformation, the forces of the 4T. What we're talking about is a narco-paramilitarization, and we're talking about these new forms of dispossession, above all the control of markets. But also Luis gives us this vision that not all of this is happening in a vacuum. It is provoking a situation today at a boiling point that echoes the words of the last communiques of the Zapatista Compas about the situation that is so violent in Chiapas, and that it is truly becoming an urgent situation. We're also seeing the concatenation of the different resistance forces that, of course, go from the Zapatista movement and all of those around them who are with them, the importance of the teachers' struggle of Section 7. And we also see the important role of support and the important paper or role that Frayba has in this. And a lot of this it makes us consider, Luis, that history hasn't been written, that there are really important events happening. The situation is developing and we need to pay close attention to what comes. So my part, before passing the word over, I would like to share here in this screen to invite you all to a way of solidarity that is very simple but very effective, which is the coffee. We want to invite you to know that we support the collectives that distribute the coffee in the United States. To please be in touch with us. You can find us on our webpage, like on or on Facebook or Instagram. And we ask that if you consume coffee, like I suppose many of us are, that you be in touch with us and you can be buyers of this coffee of great quality and at the same time a coffee that promotes what we might call just commerce, just economy in an alternative network of a that doesn't have the logic of capital. Me, for my part, I'm very grateful for your participation and for the concepts that I now carry. Caitlin, we'll pass you the word. Just to thank you all. There are very interesting contributions that are now spinning the wheels in my head. Very stimulating to be able to know, to hear what's happening. And just thank you very much for your times, for your words, for the work that you do. And good night to all of all people watching. There are a lot of comments just thanking you very much and greeting you all. Thank you very much. So we say good night.
Buenas noches, muchas gracias.
Gracias a ustedes, gracias a ti.